very quickly, just to explain my role within Hilton, because some of you may be thinking, what in the world is a design and development person doing social, and why are we here to listen to her today? A few years back, I appealed to our president and CEO when we were still based out in Beverly Hills, California, and said, I really feel strongly that I don't want social to live within marketing or PR alone. I want it to be infused throughout our entire company. And I want to help lead that charge. And so that's why the planning and integration role sits within my organization. Each of our brands still have an active role in social. It's their job to take their brand all the way forward. And some of the examples that I'm going to share with you today are really about that overarching role that we were able to provide and a viewpoint that we were able to give rather than it being within the marketing area, the PR area. Again, staying true to this sort of strong beliefs that social is not one thing, it's everything and infused across our industry. And so I'm going to start today sort of high-level travel and then move down into more macro levels and share with you some examples. So I was watching the Twitter feed. Is Brandy, where's Brandy? Brandy, I don't have any Olympic stats, so there will be no alcohol consumed during this session. But I will say that, did you guys watch the Olympic closing ceremonies last night? Did you like it? I totally dug it. Like I thought it was awesome. I thought it catered to the actual Olympians and the sort of median age of the Olympians instead of like my mom, which I thought was really cool for them to have a good closing experience. So probably stayed up a tad too late partaking in that, but nonetheless. So starting at a macro level for travel, what we know from a travel industry perspective is that people are traveling farther and more frequently than they ever have before. Certainly farther than Conrad Hilton believed they would, although he had some pretty grand visions. He believed in peace through travel. He believed in space exploration. He believed in some pretty powerful things for his day, growing up in sort of dusty Texas as he did. But from a travel perspective, again, at the macro level, what's interesting as it relates to social is that we see this sort of strong desire to tie back home. So when you're traveling, so probably many of you traveled here today are not local to Boston. You've probably connected to home in one way or another. I was watching a pretty big storm move through my hometown in Arlington, Texas last night. Obviously texting and keeping in touch with my family, but also using a weather app, looking at Twitter, looking at Facebook to see who was getting damaged, how was it progressing, making sure. I was actually keeping my daughter, who was in a closet, up to date by watching other people within the Metroplex sort of watch the storm pass through. So there's a definite connection of travelers back home. But it's an interesting dynamic. It's not just that. We now have a desire to connect to the places that we've been. So now it's a two-way. I just came back from India. India was interesting. I have some great friends that I've made in India. So how can I connect back to India? How can I not lose sight of what I saw there when I get back home? And then the more interesting thing, I think, is this sort of concept of aspirational connection, connecting to a place that I might want to go. And in some cases, aspirational denial. I want to connect to Kilimanjaro. I'm never going to climb Kilimanjaro. That's not something for me, but it probably makes me look cooler on my profile if I connect to Kilimanjaro. And so this whole connecting to both where you've been, where you come from, and where you may want to go is a really interesting phenomenon that we're watching in travel and how we might use that. In the hotel industry, while travel was expanding, we were actually seeing a different challenge take us over. How many of you had flat screen TVs in your home before your hotel room? Yeah, I know, it's slightly embarrassing. We apologize for that. But what was happening in the hotel industry for the last decade or two is that technology was surpassing the hotel's ability to keep up with it. Wi-Fi is a great example. You've probably, if you're staying here, you're paying for Wi-Fi. We're no different. You have Wi-Fi at home, you have Wi-Fi in city parks, you have Wi-Fi in many places. But we're finding as hoteliers, it's more difficult to keep up with technology. And for Hilton, this was a particular challenge and something we didn't like. Because our history, the Mad Men days, our history is that we were always first. We had air conditioning first. We had color TVs first. We had so many technology and creature functions that we had going on in our hotels. It wasn't that service wasn't important. Service was different in those eras. But as service began to overtake technology, we realized that we needed to have better service, a better approach to service than technology, because we could no way keep up with what was available in homes today. Many people now buy hotel quality products for their own homes. And again, the way in the sort of mass consumption of Sam's Club or Costco, it's easier and easier to obtain things that were once unattainable, except only by hotel companies. So as we began to look at CRM, remember that buzzword, we began to realize that customer service was really important and something that we needed to embrace. And social was no different. And so for us, the challenge was, how do we grasp this within the social realm? And of course, the immediate response that we had was, how do we control this? How do we control this thing called social? How do we take this into our brands? Again, speaking from a couple of years ago when I met with the president and CEO and said, I know this sounds weird, but let me look after this. It was really driving back to what our company vision was, which was to fill the world with the light and warmth of hospitality. A pretty powerful statement, but also a pretty easy statement. Be hospitable. That's what we do. So don't overcomplicate this, Virginia. Let's just look at what we need to accomplish. How do I put my customers front and center again? How do I engage with my customers in the way they want to be engaged with? How do I embrace the past of this powerful history of Hilton and Conrad while moving forward into the new era of technology? So I was pretty pumped. I was pretty excited about the opportunities and what we may do from a service perspective. So the first thing that I did was I evaluated the landscape. I really wanted to understand what was happening in the social realm. What were people saying? What was the engagement like? How are they communicating? How are they using the various tools globally? Facebook and Twitter took a lot of attention early on, but we've definitely expanded our networks globally because we are a global company and we sit in places in the world where a Facebook and a Twitter are not really utilized or allowed to be utilized. So as we began to contemplate how not only social, but social and mobile combination, which is the most powerful combination that we've seen since the invent of the web, how was that really impacting customer experience? How could it? And we wanted to understand how big of an opportunity was this, right? And that was a big question for many of us in the early days. Is it worth it? Is it worth it to engage? Is it worth it to invest? Is this going to move? Can we just ignore it? And this particular stat is actually from October 2011, but even before that, when we were investigating, starting in 2009, around what we were going to do, it was pretty shocking how much we were ignoring our customers, sort of all of us. Any big brand was ignoring their customers. 70% of companies ignore customer complaints on Twitter. Like, can you imagine walking to the front desk and having a complaint and them just turning around and walking off? I mean, we'd be fired. That's the bottom line. If I didn't pick up the phone at the call center, I'd be fired. If I didn't answer a customer complaint email, I'd be fired. But here we were, this big, hospitable brand, not responding in social. Unacceptable. So how do we solve this? Because it's pretty painful to see customer complaints. These are all old, of course, terribly old, dreadfully old. How do we respond to this? This is hard. This is hard to see. We don't like this. This is public. I want it to go away. I want it to be something more, something better. And so the first thing that I did, because I am a builder, I do build our websites and I build our mobile technology. And any of you who have worked in digital design and development, you know, the first rule is to build a persona. What does that persona do? What is the experience? How is that customer experience mapped out? So we mapped out both historical, current, and future customer experience journeys. And so we came up with Joe. Joe's our typical traveler. This is pretty much what a Hilton typical traveler looks like still. We haven't moved fully into millennials as our core customer base yet. And so Joe's story was pretty common. Back before the internet, he would call and make his bookings. Now he could go online. Now he could use his mobile device. At the end of the day, Joe was booking his travel. He arrived at his hotel, and maybe the restaurant wasn't up to par. And what we looked at was, before social, he probably just told his spouse, maybe a couple colleagues, that the food was cold, complained a bit, moaned a bit, the coffee was cold, it was bitter, and that was it. It was pretty containable, right? We didn't really have a lot of angst about that. If it was a more significant issue, we may do something about it, but cold eggs, we sort of, it was containable. But now Joe is a pretty connected guy. He's kind of out there, right? He's connected with all of his old girlfriends on Facebook, and he's connected with all of his colleagues, the people he aspires to be on Twitter, and he's following, all of his kids' friends on Instagram, and he's really well connected. And so now Joe has the opportunity to complain about his cold eggs before he even gets the bill. He's sitting there on his mobile device, and he's going, God, I have to give a presentation today, and the coffee's cold, and the eggs are cold, and I'm not happy. And it's dreadful. It's like, this is the new customer experience. But wait a minute. He's tweeting his eggs are cold before he's gotten his bill? Well, I can do something about that if I'm listening. If I'm listening, I can make Joe happy. And that's when the light bulb for me went off. Having this good persona, this good customer experience story that I could walk through, I could begin to find where I could engage. Where could I improve Joe's experience? And so I set out on a mission. And I began to look at the evolution of customer service within our company. And all of these steps are really important because, especially as big brands, we tend to jump to a conclusion without really learning from our history. We tend to look at, when you're a big and monstrous brand like Hilton, you tend to look at smaller companies and say, okay, I've got to go move as fast as them. I've got to go do X, Y, or Z. And we forget that our history actually gives us some amazing lessons from which to learn. And so we sat down and said, customer service is not new. Service recovery is not new for us. It is at the core of what we do. So let's, again, not overcomplicate this. Let's look at how we approach it today. And lo and behold, we remember people coming to the front desk. We remember people calling, sending email, using cards. This is all an evolution. It wasn't a revolution. As much as it's fun to kind of walk into the C-suite and say, I have a revolution and I'm going to change everything, it really wasn't. It was just a new channel. And I had this amazing team of guest assistance folks, and that's what they do for a living, is solve service problems. So why did I need to recreate something? I needed to really just teach them the tools of my trade so that they could solve even more service issues. And so I got to work, and I turned the company in the right direction, and I began a program with our call center. I reached out to them and explained to them that really social was just an extension of the other places that they worked. Calls, emails, letters that are written. Yes, we still get handwritten or typed letters. All of those things, it all has the common thread, which is service recovery. Someone didn't have the experience we wanted them to have, and we wanted to make it better. And so we began to engage with them and teach them and train them to utilize the social tools. And the amazing thing happened. They began to do service recovery in social. We started with one brand, and I'm happy to report we now have all brands participating, including Honors. And so what was the outcome that we were looking for, the ideal outcome that we were trying to achieve? This is a great example of the ideal outcome, right? It wasn't a separate group of social media trained people who were scouring just one Twitter handle or one Facebook handle and trying to achieve responses to that single guest who had talked directly to Hilton. This is a real example, and I've blurred out the name because I didn't call him and ask permission, so although his picture's here. This is a real example. All he did was check into Foursquare. Hey, I'm here. Great, we know you're here. And he had a problem with his air conditioning unit. He tweeted about it, we called him, and we made it right. And his last comment was, it's scary how efficient Hilton had used Twitter to solve his problem. He didn't tweet at us. We weren't following him previously. We were listening. And so we were able to not only improve his day, but impress him. Freak him out a little maybe. But we were able to improve his experience with us and have him come back. That was the ideal outcome, was to listen as broadly as possible. And so I'm very pleased to say again, today within Hilton Worldwide, for all brands, US only, we are now working on global expansion. We are actively listening in Twitter and Facebook, and we're expanding to other channels as well. Again, if you have a service issue, you don't have to tweet at us. You don't have to Facebook post on every brand wall. You can even Facebook post on the Hilton wall for a Hampton issue, and we're still going to respond to you. We're still going to take care of you. And there's countless stories out there of amazing, both proactive and reactive customer service things that our guest assistance team has done. So I wasn't settled with that. That wasn't enough for me. So that was good, but to me that was like table stakes. Like that's our job, is to solve problems, right? As much as we would love every customer that walks through the Hilton doors to have an amazing experience, problems happen. We have a ton of hotels around the world, and once in a while hot water is going to run cold. So it wasn't enough for me, because I'm a huge Conrad Hilton supporter. I'm one of only 2 people in the company that have his painting in my office. I've been with Hilton for actually 15 years now, and I really believe in the things that he stood for around hospitality. And I believe in again, the peace through travel, and I believe in the working for charity. And I really believe in hospitality. Like that's why I do this, is I believe that when I travel a lot, and I know when I'm traveling a lot, I'm not home, and it can be difficult, and people travel for all different reasons, and I want to make whatever that reason is as enjoyable as possible. And so at the same time we were looking at this service recovery platform, I was looking at, and I started on my own little grassroots project called Hilton Suggests. This is a Twitter-only program. And I was extremely fortunate, again, to have some good friends within the company, and I reached out to a group of people who were based out of New York that were willing to help me with this. And they were tremendous. They were great team members that were willing to help. And what Hilton Suggests is it's not a concierge program. It's been featured in the press once in a while as a concierge program. It's not. It's really more about being, to steal a phrase from the great brand Hampton Inn, they're really more of a friend in town. So the concept was, if I can listen for service problems, I can listen for good things too. I can listen for people who are seeking and looking for help in a city where I have an expert. Our people grow and live in the cities that they work, and so they know things about that city that even beyond a concierge. And so what I realized is all these people were asking for help. Restaurants in London, good Mexican food. There's no tip associated with this. There's no concierge whose brother owns a restaurant down the street. This is just people who love their city and wanted to share. And it was a huge success in New York. It was great. I was over the moon. And then a terrible thing happened. The New York office closed and they were all transferred. And I thought, well, that's okay. I can transfer success. And so I talked to some buddies in Orlando and Dallas that were based out of the call center, and they agreed to take on the program, and it tanked. And I was devastated. I was like, my little pet project, what's happened? It was going so well in New York. What happened to it? About the same time, I had brought on Vanessa San Diegas, who is my guru in social, and she looks after it for me full time, social planning and integration. And as any good boss would do, I said, here, fix this. I'm busy. Take this on. Figure it out. It's important to me. I think it's right. I think there's something here. Figure it out. So Vanessa actually went to work with our HR department, our legal department, and she worked through the challenges of being able to have an internal advocacy program. And it was a great success. So we expanded to 12 cities. We asked for volunteers within those cities. And these are just 3 of our team members. The sort of side effect of this, right, customers and guests who were, or not even customers and guests, people who were just tweeting about needing a restaurant reservation were shocked and delighted. It was surprising to them that Hilton would be willing to tell them about a restaurant, but I'm not staying at a Hilton. That's okay. We're just being hospitable. We're being what Conrad set out to be. We're trying to infuse the world with hospitality. Whether you stay with us or not, that's what we're about. And hopefully you'll recognize that and maybe choose us in the future if you didn't choose us today. Think about us next time. You know, those guys at Hilton were really helpful, and I want to stay with them now. I want to see if there's more behind that. But the side benefit is that our employees were incredibly proud to work on this program, both in guest assistance and in Hilton Suggests. It really was a morale booster, and people were now volunteering because they wanted to have this opportunity. This was above and beyond their current role. There was no pay for this. This was completely a volunteer opportunity. And so we found another avenue that allowed us as leaders within the company to encourage our employee base to take another step in exposure. And actually this person in the middle here, Lucy, actually gained insights that allowed her to further her career by some of the experiences that she was gaining. So there were 4 main lessons that I learned through this process. The first was to find my focus. In social, that's really hard. Social, and I would also say mobile, it's really hard to find the focus because there's so many shiny objects. There's so many next great things. There's so many cool campaigns. There's so many different ways to engage. And there's a lot of small, nimble companies doing amazing things. And as a big brand, I can fall into that trap incredibly quickly, and it's hard. And I have 10 brands with 10 amazing vice presidents of marketing who definitely want the next shiny thing. And my job as planning and integration is to really find that focus and keep them away from new Coke. Keep them focused on what we're trying to achieve as a company. And then number 2, engage others. That was a huge lesson for me. Right? We tend to overcomplicate things. We like to overcomplicate things. I don't know if it's the hero syndrome where we make it a little harder so that when we solve it, it's now amazing. But we tend not to want to reach into the breadth of our organizations to help us be successful. And if you don't reach out to other departments, I don't know anybody that has, you know, sort of this any big brands that have this sort of amazing social budget that's overtaken their full marketing budget yet. We're not there yet. And so you have to depend on other resources in order to be successful. The third lesson that I learned was to define success. Write it down. If you don't define it, you don't know when you've achieved it. So before you start, you need to figure out what success looks like for you, for this program, for what you're trying to achieve, through your data, through your personas, through your storyline, whatever it is, whatever your success is. If you don't define it, then how do you know? I know that this success, this guy who tweeted this picture and put it out there, that we did something great for him, that was success. And then lastly, have fortitude. And anybody who's either heard me speak before or knows me, this is huge for me if you're in emerging technology. So I've worked in the web since 15 years ago, actually about 17 years ago, and I've worked in mobile since 2001. And then I took on social for the company. If I didn't have fortitude in these type of environments, you're not going to survive. Be strong. Believe in the product that you're working on for your company. You will be denied certain things. Things will change. Facebook will change their rules on some Monday morning that you are not expecting. Instagram will get bought by someone that will irritate the crap out of you. It will happen. You have to have fortitude if you're working in emerging technologies. Start small, but think big to work and to achieve those goals. So those are the 4 lessons that I learned from my journey in guest assistance and Hilton Suggests. So I will take any questions this morning, early morning. I'll even take Olympics questions. Great question. I didn't have to. So I didn't ask for permission. It was small enough that I didn't need sort of full permission to engage. And I used volunteers. So there was no cost initially. There was zero cost to the company, so there was only benefit. Really, the only thing I had to do was work with what I call our brand police, making sure that I was representing the company appropriately. But because I was over social planning and integration, I was already working with our HR and legal and PR departments on our social responsibilities. So I knew what I could and couldn't do in that environment. And then once I started it and it worked, then I worked with the brands individually to approve the rollout. And again, the play was not a revenue-based one. The play was a service-based one. How do we get into the hearts and minds of our customers so that we can increase growth over the long haul? And that was the position that I took. But by gaining volunteers, I was able to make progress before I even had to sort of pitch for approval, if you will. Yes? No. We're standalone. So we are technically the online group, and we're independent. I have, being there as long as I've been there, we've been under marketing, under sales, under technology. We've been sort of all over. But that was one of the reasons that I pitched for social, is that we were an autonomous group from the marketing group.
So you have all the web products?
I do.
Self-service as well as sales?
That's correct.
We have a question back here.
Yeah, so I noticed your title is VP Digital Design. Do you combine your persona with any sort of web online personalization, stuff like that?
Yes, we do. So we have a couple of varying layers of personas within our company. We have digital personas and then our global big master Hilton worldwide personas. And then within our digital personas, we've begun to break out social. And we're actually taking on an exercise now where our master personas are taking on social as well. Because as you can imagine, the social dynamic, when you look at it from an anthropology perspective, it's pretty consistent around the world, but there are some nuances that are important to us. China, Japan, India, for example, very different type of engagement that we are looking at. At the end of the day, the sort of Maslow principles are all still there, and they really are resonating. But as we start to get into millennials, we're starting to see some interesting behavior shifts globally. It's actually starting to look more similar globally than different, because it's a bit smaller world, if you will, and connected. And so we by no means sort of one fell swoop made all of our personas sort of socially minded, but we are going back and now making them all socially minded. Any other questions? Yes.
So you said you try to avoid all of the sort of the shiny new objects, yes, and the funky new things and new technologies and all these great things that are happening. Do you still evaluate these technologies, or do you just kind of look away and say, we've got our focus, we don't want to look at anything else, and sort of keep it just straight and narrow?
So that's a great question. It's a really hard balance, because I am at heart, I like to try new things. I am an innovator at heart. I think what I try to steer my marketing groups to do is to invest wisely. And so really looking at their brand, I challenge them to always look at their business rules. So for example, Pinterest might be right for 50% of our brands. But for some of our luxury brands, perhaps it's not the right play for them right now, or how they engage in Twitter may not be the right play for them right now. Or putting social icons all over a luxury homepage, for example, on the website, that might be a little off-putting to someone who's spending the amount of money that they're spending, but they still want to connect. They just want to do it in a more sophisticated manner. And so what we do at Planning and Integration, which makes it so fun to have this role, is that we're constantly out pushing brands and saying, hey, are you interested in this? Do you want to try this? And once they try it, we have a committee-based structure. We ask them to feed that back in, and then we'll guide the other brands on whether we think it works for them or not. So as long as we're trying in small doses, we're okay. Where we get itchy is when someone comes and says, I want to take all my budget and I want to do this because X brand did that. That's where we sort of put the new Coke sign up and say, slow your roll. Do a little smaller, and then we can grow and go big. And that's the beauty of being a big brand. We can't take forever to catch up, but we can a little bit take a little longer than some of the smaller brands have the luxury to do. Yes?
I just wondering, so when you mention luxury brands and how they interact, how do you treat that differently?
Great question. So, for example, recently we had a huge event with the Tribeca Film Festival, and that was targeted to our Conrad and Waldorf brand. And so we catered more in the blogging realm. So we certainly engaged in Twitter and Facebook, but to a lesser degree. We really embraced the blogosphere more than we embraced, sort of with DoubleTree, for example, the cookie truck that drove around and passed out cookies all over the country. Luxury went to Tribeca. So they stayed within their business rules, right? Always tie back to business rules. Everything we do in social needs to tie back to the larger business rules. And so you begin to say, don't think about social. Plan out what you're doing. What are you trying to achieve? Tribeca is a good match for you. Fantastic. Now what can we do to extend that into social, whether that's through pre-engagement, during engagement, post-engagement. And it was determined for that one, blogging was the most effective thing that we could do because of the nature of what we were dealing with for that luxury brand. So each brand, from our extended stay all the way up to luxury, they have different business goals. And so what we encourage them to do is just plot your business out, and then we'll overlay social onto that and really make that part of the thread rather than I want to have a social campaign. And we've been successful in some areas, and in others we see a few things go out that we go, well, we'll see how it goes. And usually it doesn't go well, and we bring them back to their business goals, and then they knock it out of the park because they're great at what they do. They're great brand marketing folks who are incredibly talented at what they do. It's just sometimes they get too far into the social realm and don't pull that thread through. They're immensely adaptable once they learn that.
Any other questions? Thank you, Virginia. Oh, I apologize. Very quickly.
One more. I can hear you.
Yeah, how do you keep your voluntary employees motivated and accountable?
Beer and pizza. Seriously. I was just actually doing my budget for next year, and I seriously have a beer and pizza line item for many reasons. It's not that hard. It's really not. I mean, they get to kind of show their grandma, if you will, that they are sort of out in the Twitter sphere representing their company, and they're really excited about that. It's awoken them to new opportunities. Our biggest challenge right now is turnover because they're getting promoted and getting busy. But as far as sort of the motivation, we really promote them internally. We make a big deal about them. So anytime I'm meeting with the president or the CEO or my boss, I make a big deal about them and we celebrate them. But on a small scale level, I buy them T-shirts. I literally last week walked upstairs and delivered some chocolates to a group of them. And majority they skew a little younger. So, they're still enticed and excited by recognition, by just sort of pure recognition. They haven't become jaded like me where it's like, yeah, okay, thanks. Where's the cash? They're still really inspired by just executive level recognition, and that's worked well for us. But as we explore it globally, we are looking at other ways to promote that. But we've heard from other brands like Best Buy and Dell and others, Nokia, that they have the same phenomenon, that they really don't have to motivate or inspire too much. Generally, people are happy to be a part of that type of experience because they feel like maybe they've had a bad day and they feel like they couldn't deliver what they needed to deliver, and they get online and help someone and they instantly feel like they've achieved something that day. So that's been great for us. Well, thank you all very much. I hope you're here for the panel later. I'll be back. I hope you're okay with that. And I'll see you on in a little bit.